Questions for Lana is a good opportunity to write them down in there, and so
that little chat
you
box
might just want to
open. So
Lana, what tell us a little bit about your area in Saskatchewan, just for the next couple of minutes perhaps, and then we'll because it's
sure, I can do a bit of a slow preamble so that latecomers don't really miss anything. So for Saskatchewan, I'm in a relatively warm and relatively moist area in the southeast. So main crops here would be wheat, canola, peas, soybeans. There's a little bit of corn and sunflowers. And so I basically run a small farmer directed research farm. So they are they're my bosses, and they make the financial decisions. So it's not like an advisory board, it's actually a nonprofit that's run by the farmers. And the farm owns a quarter of land and some plot equipment. So we run a research program. And as a result of being both very isolated, a bit bored, and doing these agricultural things, I ended up on Twitter talking to a lot of farmers because we have things that we're all being plant nerds about things, and so I ended up knowing a lot of people that were doing a lot of really interesting things, and it's kind of snowballed in various ways into this intercropping. Aside from that, I come from a fairly long line of farmers, and I'm not the first person in my family with a degree, but I would be like the second, I guess. So I know how to talk farmer well enough, and I know how to talk researcher enough to get by, kind of. So I'm kind of a translator between our research people who are not, in large part, not very effective at talking to farmers, and the farmers who in large part are not very effective at talking to researchers. So I'm kind of the go-between and translator that way. Should I get started?
Yeah, great.
Okay. So yeah, I run a little research farm, and let me just give my presentation here. This is I sometimes throw in a picture of my grandfather so that people kind of know where I'm coming from. So when I'm talking to farmers, I'm always trying to think, how would I communicate this to my own family members so that they have what they need to make decisions. So I'm hoping by the end we'll be able to have answered a lot of your questions, and it's a process. The questions you have at the start is very different from what you have after getting into it for a while, when you know more. So this is what our trials look like. That's a chickpea flax trial, and this is me and another researcher with a bunch of farmers and different people talking about what the purpose of these trials are. And that's one of the places where we're able to really interface with the farmers and find out things. A lot of the time it's one-on-one conversations. This is what some of our trials look like. This is a chickpea flax thing, which is one of our really good intercrops here. It's probably not particularly suitable in your area. I don't know for sure. I wasn't going to get into that one in particular, but so I do the small plot farming. I still farm in a way, but my end product isn't the grain. My product is the data, and the grain is just a byproduct that we pretty much just give away or eat or do whatever we please with. So we're still producing the grain, but our real product is the data. But it also means that I need to be able to know how to grow the crops well, properly. If I expect farmers to take it seriously and take our results seriously, I need to show that we're doing these things well, we're growing our crops well. So why mixed grain intercropping? Let me see, I thought I had a slide. Mixed grain intercropping is something that when we're talking about growing 2 grain crops simultaneously, that's what I'm calling intercropping. Sometimes people say intercropping and that's what they mean, but there's a lot of other types of intercropping, like relay cropping, or even ones where you've got trees planted and then other things planted in between the rows. There's a lot of different kinds of intercropping. At its most basic, intercropping is just intentionally growing more than one species of plant together in an agricultural setting. So livestock people do this all the time. They will intentionally plant more than one species for various benefits. So if you could extend that idea to grain crops, that's a harder thing to accomplish, but we're doing it for much the same reasons as the livestock producers do this. So when people ask me, why are you doing this? The reply from one of our particularly experienced intercroppers is, why not? Why is the base assumption that we only grow 1 grain crop at a time? That's what we normally do, but why is that the assumption? So the obstacles to doing this are surmountable, but it takes a lot of intention, it takes planning. You can't willy-nilly just throw together 2 crops at any random seeding rate and expect it to turn out well. So there's been years of trial and error and research trials combined to work out some things that seem pretty reliable to work. So that's for productivity, yield overall. Yes, it has to be productive, it has to yield. The main drivers, sometimes they're yield, but a lot of the time it's pest reduction, harvestability, that knowing that something like pea, you're going to be able to harvest it more efficiently. You can grow types of peas that are more lodgy and be able to reliably harvest them. Nutrient use efficiency, the ability to have legumes with non-legumes and have little or no nitrogen added to the system. Because the legumes are fixing nitrogen, that's an attraction for a lot of people. There's some kinds of risk mitigation to growing 2 crops together, because there's areas, oftentimes there's areas of topography where 1 crop will do better than another. There's also years where 1 crop will do better than another. So if you look at an intercrop field, there could be variability across the landscape where in some areas there's more of 1 crop than another. That's actually a feature of this system, but it looks weird to people when they're used to looking across their field and seeing uniformity, and that being the judge, the measure by which they determine if their crop is good or not. If it looks uniform, this won't necessarily look uniform. So, I tell people when they're thinking about doing this that they need to change how they see their crop. They need to change their eyes for the crop to adjust that so that they're not, feeling like this looks bad. Well, why does it look bad? Because you're used to uniformity. Ecosystem services, and among that, in that is also things like soil health. So soil biology. There's some reasons to think that more diversity in plants will result in more diversity in soil biology. Some of that is still kind of an open question that is beyond my capabilities. Other things are reductions in soil erosion that we've seen but haven't proven scientifically from some of this intercropping, particularly compared to pulses grown on their own. So we grow lentils, we grow peas, we grow chickpeas, we grow soybeans. You grow them on their own, that land is very subject to wind erosion and water erosion. And we have this thing called snert here with snow dirt. And so you'll see snow drifts with a lot of dirt in them. Here, it's kind of a black eye that you see far too much of. So probably reductions in snert for us, but I hear you guys don't need to worry about snert. So there's a number of things that aren't very well documented, but are part of the reasons that farmers are looking at this. I think there may be less pathogenic soil problems, but don't know for sure. So why is this going on in Saskatchewan? How did this start? I think it's a really interesting question. Normally, when you have an adoption of some new technology and a new agricultural technology, it's started by the people with the most money and the ones that can most afford to put things at risk, that can, you know, that can afford to risk things on a new technology. And in this situation, it's kind of the opposite. It's some of the people that are most risk adverse, that are on land that's not the primo land, that's not where the weather has been throwing them some curveballs, and they're trying to adapt to the variability in both their landscape and in the climate by having sort of a self-insuring crop. How this kind of got, I think this kind of gets started from farmers going, okay, I've got volunteer canola in my peas, and accidentally, and the peas are standing really well where I have volunteers, I'm just going to harvest that together and separate it. Like, this is not a really hard thing for farmers to figure out. It's kind of an old farmer hack, an old farmer trick that had gone on for quite a lot of years, that was never taken seriously. It was never really explored. It was kind of treated like a little regressive kind of a quirk that some people were getting up to. And there was a little bit of research done, but it never really went very far. The tendency is for this is to test it for a couple of years, and then it kind of runs out of gas as far as funding for the research. And then, you know, some new innovation comes along for some herbicide resistant crop, and then people quit doing it. So there was a few farmers that had taken up or persisted in some intercropping. At the time that they were starting it, they were relatively quite young. They're my age or a little older now, I think. So, and just very inventive people that weren't put off by doing things different. I have a theory that some of these things are taken up by people whose fathers were early adopters of no-till, whose fathers were early adopters of some soil health practices that were innovative in their generation. And some of these people are now taking up intercropping as a next logical step for the farmers in our area. So what happened was there was a little bit of farmers doing this. There was some rogue researchers like me and Scott Chalmers, just a little handful of people that were running remote little research stations who spend more time with farmers than they do other researchers by virtue of being kind of remote. And then spending time on Twitter and just talking about things. So we were kind of left to our own devices for a few years and managed to cobble together a little bit of money here and there to run a few trials to help to validate things. So there was me and Bill May, and then actually there was a bunch that I'm missing off that list actually, but gradually we've got a few more researchers coming on, and at the same time we're getting more and more farmers. So there's strength in having the research people, at least a few research people and some innovative farmers working together really closely to help validate. You help validate what the farmers are seeing, but the farmers can also help you design research trials that are actually answering valid and useful questions, because you can design research trials to answer questions that no one is asking. That's stupid. So you need to be able to answer the right kind of questions. and use the best knowledge that the farmers have at that point for what they've learned from through trial and error to set up something that's useful. So it's in 2019, I think there was 75,000 documented acres in Saskatchewan, and I don't know, you guys probably talk in hectares. We still talk in acres, and it would have ended up being about 100,000 acres total of intercropping, and that's over a dozen different combinations of crops. That's what gets tricky about this, is that there's so many possible combinations and so many things to try. So if you want to start thinking about doing this, and we'll get into more into reason why there might be benefits in a little bit, but where you want to start if you're considering doing this is thinking about what is the purpose. Now, if your main thing is that you've got a more expensive cash crop and you're trying to build your soil functionality and biology so that your more expensive crop like bulbs or carrots or something is more successful and performs better, that becomes part of your purpose. What does success look like? It's good to have reasonable expectations, and part of those expectations is that you are going to fail some. So you need to design to set this up so that you can fail in a controlled way that you can afford. So it's experimental, and if you want to do it, then you start the learning process and treat it as a trial, basically, instead of, okay, I'm assured this will work. Here's, a quarter of my farm going into this. It depends what it is, how risky it is, but it's good to start small. You keep your goals reasonable, and so, like I said, you need to adjust your expectations for more diversity, more unpredictability. You don't really control the outcome. You control the seeding rate, you control the fertility that you put on, you control which land you put it on, you control which herbicides you use, which is not very many that you really can use. Beyond that, you kind of just have to let it play out. So it's kind of it's a competition between those two crops, and they kind of sort each other out. And it's not entirely predictable what the mix of those crops will be in the end. And that's something that's uncomfortable. If you want to do this, it's best to give yourself a couple of years and start small and treat it like an experiment, because you are going to learn, you're going to be making mistakes, things you can improve on, move forward and try again next year. And if there's anything that's one of the things that I know about farming, is that isn't always an ongoing process. You look at what you did, you went, okay, I can see how I can improve on that. You tweak things and then try again next year. That's always an ongoing process. So you have to have that kind of approach with this. A lot of the goals come down to resiliency and profitability. Soil health goals, hopefully you get that. You're trying to build soil and build a cropping system that can take a hit and keep going, that has some ability to withstand things. Just a second, I need to go deal with a thing in my house.
All right, well, there you go.
And then let them back in.
We've all got children we're wrangling, Lana, so. Yeah.
Okay,
right,
I'm back. The dog needed to pee. Okay. So, thinking about what possible crops you might want to combine, you need to be thinking about what they would actually benefit each other. What would be the strategy of putting those crops together? It's kind of like a marriage of crops. You need to find things that are compatible. And then it's just the start of the process. Once you put those crops together, there's still a lot of work to figure out how to make that function properly. So canola and peas is one that I'll talk about some more. It's probably the most well-known intercrop. They call it Piola. It's one of the oldest ones. And it's also a bit tricky, and I'll talk about that later. Flax and lentils is one that some people are doing at very low rates of flax with the lentils. Flax and chickpeas, one I've worked on since 2012. Camellia and lentils is another one that's really interesting. And there's some of these that I really want to spend more time on that I haven't, or doing trials and haven't yet.
What's Camellia? What's Camellia? I don't
Okay.
know if we've had that.
I think Camellia would be interesting for your area. It's a very small seeded crop. It's a brassica, and I forget the Latin name of it. It's also known as false flax. It's a very old Northern European oilseed crop that was used both as human food and as, I think, a lamp oil. It's smaller seed than canola, and it can be a winter seeded thing or a summer seeded thing. It is has a small developed market in Canada, and it's been approved for human food purposes. It's a really good, healthy cooking oil, and it's got benefits to livestock. The meal is actually really good for livestock. What is the Latin name? Camellia sativa is the Latin name, but it's sometimes known as false flax. And so you can have a look on that. Colin Rosengren, who is one of our OG intercroppers here, is part of a company that grows and markets camellia. And they only grow and market camellia as an intercrop since the last 3 years, I think, because it grows better in an intercrop than it does on its own. You can basically use whatever herbicides on it that are or it will tolerate herbicides that other brassicas will tolerate. So ethylfluralin and there's a small list. Oh, somebody grew camellia in field trials 20 years ago. Yields were lower than canola. So yes, you maybe need a premium. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is intercropping is a way to take some 90-pound weaklings and put them together in a pairing so that you don't need to compete head-to-head on canola. So a canola monocrop is always going to beat a camellia monocrop. A camellia with a pea could end up being better and more profitable than a canola on its own, or even with a canola pea. So a crop that's not super competitive, that's not great on its own, can be really good in an intercrop. So that's why I was kind of calling it a 90-pound weakling. But two 90-pound weaklings together, they might actually stand a chance. Flax and chickpeas is one where flax is kind of annoying on its own, and chickpeas are like really bad for disease and maturity, and they're just a risky crop. But you put the two of them together and they become less annoying and less risky. So that's a little plug for why we're doing some of this. Even with the mustard, yeah, lentils are not very competitive. Camellia with lentils is a good one. Camellia with peas is a good one. Some people were doing camellia peas and lentils all together, but that's definitely a higher level of separation technology and not a beginner kind of intercrop. So that's an interesting one. The mustards, that's one of the reasons that the mustards are working well as an intercrop, is that they don't compete for acres very well with canola here. But if you grow them with a pea, it works really well. And if you get 20 bushels an acre of mustard plus a bunch of peas, that can still be very profitable. So you'll notice I'm mainly talking about the oil seeds and the pulses. One reason for that is that most of the oil seeds are very small seeded and the pulses are relatively larger seeded. That makes them easier to separate. And you don't plant anything together that you can't separate unless you're unless you have a market or a use for the mixed grain, which segues nicely into the cereals. So cereals with the nitrogen fixers, they can work relatively well together, but the seed size difference is not nearly as big as it is with the oil seeds. So you can grow oats with peas, or oats with lentils, or barley and peas, oats with fava beans probably. There's a number of them that will work. It's a matter of whether you can afford to separate them or if you can use the mixed grain. There's also a nice backup plan or a nice multi-purpose functionality to those that you could put that in a bale. You could bale it. And that's what happens to some of these intercrops, like an oat and pea. If there's more weeds than they were expecting, then they'll just bale the whole thing. And then you're not contributing to the weed seed bank. If they've got a market for those green feed bales, then that's still a productive crop. You also have the option of underseeding some of these with things like cover crops or a biennial forage or something like that. And that's something that some people are doing. Because a lot of these intercrops, we can't use very many herbicides, it's a nice way to establish a perennial or biennial forage seed crop under an intercrop. So this can get as complicated as you want to. You just have to keep in mind that in the end, you want something that you can separate and sell. So somebody says, oats and peas are a great mix here for baling. Yes. So, and here it depends, our rainfall is probably more variable than it is for you. So there's some years where there's big demand for bales of oats and peas, and there's some years where there's not because there's lots of grass. So you'll know probably at the time when you have to decide if you're going to bale it or not, if it's a dry year or a wet year, and make that decision. But it's a nice multi-purpose one. So when thinking about that list, you need to figure out on a particular piece of land where you think you want to intercrop, what do you really want to be able to spray? What weeds do you need to be able to control to manage your weed seed bag? So for some places, that's some really nasty pigweeds and whatever noxious weeds or whatever. Like, make sure you're dealing with those as best you can. And the next thing is, what can you sell or use there? There's some places that I've talked to in the States where they don't, in the US or parts of Alberta, where they don't have ready markets or delivery points or handling facilities for some of these oddball crops. Obviously, like something like Camellia, which it would be really, really super new in your area, you wouldn't have places that you can easily sell it. Doesn't mean you can't develop something, but that sets how interested people are going to be or how much they might want to grow. Efficiency of separating is very important. You can separate almost anything. It's a matter of how much is it going to cost, right? So I'll talk about separation a little bit more later, but before, you have to think about separation before you even think about which crops you're going to put together, because I don't want to hear from farmers that grew some random things together like canola and flax and then are unhappy with the inability to be able to separate them. Like, don't put those together. Which segues, well, the herbicide residuals, that's something to watch for. You've got if you're going to seed two crops, you need to keep in mind that you could have something damaged by herbicide residuals. Volunteers. Think about what you have that's going to come up on that field And then are you going to be able to control it with herbicides, or are you going to be able to separate out those volunteers as part of your separation process? So if you put this on cereal stubble, are you going to be able to separate out some barley out of pea canola? Probably. But ultimately you want something that's saleable. One of the tricky ones with our chickpea flax is having brassica volunteers, like canola in there. If you have volunteer canola coming up in there, it's possible but not easy to separate flax from canola. So it's best to have that taken care of. And it becomes expensive. It could cost you, $1 a bushel or more. Well, that's using up a lot of your profit. If it becomes a really big cost per acre. Also think about your infrastructure. Just a second, I have to check something.
I've often wondered, how big is a bushel?
Sorry,
does anyone know?
I'm back. What's that?
Oh, how big is a bushel? We talk kilograms and tons.
I'm sorry, I'm so used to talking to farmers here. The weird thing, okay, a bushel, it depends. It depends on the crop. It's a volume measurement. And it's a really annoying, weird holdover that we have here, that we talk about crops in volume and there's a standard conversion. And so let's say, but most of them it's 60 pounds, which is how many kilograms?
27 or 28 kilos, I think.
Yeah. So like 20, if the most of the separation costs would be 0.25, so 28 $7. I don't, you guys figure it out.
Never mind.
It's late in the evening for me to do math, so
yeah, sure.
I'm just going to carry on. So you have to keep in mind competitive ability, and that also is related to market class and variety traits. So some of them are more competitive than others. Canola, especially hybrid canola, is relatively competitive compared to pulses. Your big leafy viney peas are more competitive than the semi-leafless peas that stand really well. Forage peas are very competitive. So people that have some experience with that, with some of those crops, will know. If you have access to variety trials or can go look at them, you'll be able to see some different traits that they have. The other thing related to that is matching maturity. So you want to pick crops that are going to mature at close to the same time. That's really important, and that can change with variety. So you might want a relatively early canola and a relatively late pea. So you play within what's available for varieties to try to match maturity best as possible. Another one is how bad are the harvest losses potentially. So shatter tolerance on the canola is nice. Mustard is less shattery than canola, which is one of the reasons that mustard is an easier starting point for intercrops, if you've even got markets for that, which I don't know. We grow a lot of mustard in Saskatchewan. Moisture conditions does make a little bit of a difference. And then the area you're in obviously makes a difference. If you're in an area where you can reasonably expect certain crops to mature, then you consider those crops. If not, then don't grow them. What about rotations? I'm really not going to, since you're growing bulbs and carrots and all kinds of lovely things around there, I don't know what you're going to have in your rotations, but your basic concepts that you follow, you can just think about them with a little more complexity. So here, if a place is like lentil country, then they only grow that pulse. They don't switch up between different pulses. If they grow canola, then they're probably not going to be a flax grower or grow more than one different oilseed. And one of the things that's happened with intercropping is that some of these farmers will end up growing multiple pulses and multiple oil seeds over the course of a 4 or 6 year crop sequence. So but you have to just keep in mind what your weed and insect and disease cycles are, and treat crop rotation in a little bit more sophisticated way. And you don't have to intercrop everything. Like, this isn't like an organic system where you're all in or you're all out. Like, you can dabble. You can have 1 year out of 8 where you grow intercrops, or only have certain fields where you want to do some intercropping, and that's totally fine. So started brainstorming a little bit, and then put them in order of easy to separate and not so easy. I don't know why I started with the not so easy to separate, but these are things. These are all things that in a pinch you can put in a bale. So any cereal with a pea you can put in a bale. And so I've heard you guys do some winter cereals. Is winter barley a thing there? Yes, no?
We don't
This is
have a lot. No, ours tend to be spring barleys, but we still grow them in winter, so that's where it gets slightly confusing. So they don't have the vernalization that you're talking about.
Okay. So you could plant a pea and a barley together at a few different times in the year and still have it turn out. Maybe it's a bit foreign to me.
Yep.
But anyways, there's a few combinations, and the having peas with some of the different cereals, a barley or a oats or a winter wheat is all worth trying. How that will work out maturity wise is a big unknown to me. I don't know. You won't know until you try it. But if you know when they mature as monocrops, that will definitely give you a good indication of which ones might match up for maturity. And there are people here that are using or selling mixed feed grains. So they're selling pea oats or they're selling pea barley to livestock producers that are feeding animals. So that's something to keep in mind, because the separation costs for some of these cereal pea things can get quite expensive. And the reason is that they yield quite a lot of volume. They're not necessarily worth a lot by weight, or they're not worth a lot by weight by tons. But your separation costs are incurred basically by the volume of material that you're putting through what you're separating. So for most of the intercrop, most of the time, your high value per weight of seed is important for trying to make sure that you can afford those separation costs. So easier to separate is your canolas and peas. So whenever you plant them, I don't know. I'm not sure how that would work out. Flax and fava beans is one that may work. It's a fava beans like cooler temperatures. Do you guys grow fava beans?
Yep, it's just not large quantities. The market's our big problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we don't have much. We don't have much food market here, and the feed market is still pretty iffy on them. They're working on some types that have a low visine something or other that makes them more suitable for a lot of markets. So, but the flax and fava beans I've done together, that worked pretty well. Do you guys grow flax? Not really?
I'm assuming as you're meaning linseed?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
We do a bit, yeah.
Little bit of linseed. Okay. Yes, we call it flax. I do know it is sometimes referred to as linseed here, but only by scientists and not by farmers. Camelinas. There's such thing as winter lentil also. And you probably, do you grow any lentils there?
Not commercially. We have had the occasional paddock, and it tends to be the high premium ones like French green lentils, Dupuy lentils.
Yeah, fancy ones. Some of the ones here that those are the type of things I suggest to people if they're going to try intercropping lentils in a place that is really not lentil country. There's some black ones here, the little black lentils that are they call them beluga lentils because people are trying to delude themselves that it's caviar, and which I think is entertaining.
So these are derived from Indian head, are they?
Yeah, from the Indian head lentils, which Al Slinkard here developed, and he thought they were ugly, so he released them as a plow down lentil, like as a cover crop lentil, basically. And then there was some people in the States that decided, hey, these are actually good to eat and they're kind of cool. And then it was just a rebranding issue that they called them beluga lentils, and now they're like gourmet, right? So those are some that you could have a look at. Like organic, they were selling for $1 a pound to the farmers, those black lentils. So, and then camelina is another one. So we're talking about some things that, you know, almost don't exist in your area, but you know, this is a good point to be thinking about really oddball things because
Lana, we've got about 15 minutes left of our scheduled time. We can sort of go over with, you know, casual conversation at the end, but is there a lot more to get through? And I know we wanted to talk briefly on your adopt a plot trial before we have questions too. Just how are you going?
I'm going to skip that.
If you wanted to go back through those slides, if people want to look at them, we are recording, so they could pause a video or something.
Okay, you want to do that?
Yeah, just give it a couple of seconds per slide, and then.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm taking along with some other things. So this was there's not a reliable nitrogen response to the pea canola. So this is some data from Scott Chalmers. There was a good reliable phosphorus response. So if you're going to put some fertilizer to this pea canola, it's actually more advantage to putting the phos to it. And then land equivalency ratio was showing the same thing, that they were getting more of a phos response. The nitrogen, it tends to produce a little more of the oil seed and less of the pulse, but overall you're not really profiting that much more. So what's the point? And you're making the peas lazy. You don't want to make your peas lazy by putting a bunch of nitrogen on them in an intercrop situation. It's just kind of throwing away money. You need enough nitrogen on the intercrop to make the non-pulse perform the way you want it to. But that's not going to be, it's going to be somewhat nitrogen deficient in an ideal situation. The intercropping reduced aphids, which is cool. Compared to the peas on their own. So this is pea aphids. This is some data from a pea oat trial. So you can have a look at that data a little bit more if you want. We did a few studies of that. Okay, harvesting is, you got to be flexible and plan ahead, and you get some experience and you can deal with it. Stubble. Separation, you can have a look at those after. You need lots of augers. These are fun ones for the farmers to try to figure out how they're going to set that up in their yard. We're running out of time, but David sent me a few questions. So I came up with a few answers. So this is not just a conventional or just an organic thing. It's everybody. Like there's very conventional people that love their herbicides that are into this. There's very organic people. It's just everybody that are all kinds of farmers from all kinds of philosophies, more regenerative people, but not exclusively. So let's see. If I was going to give you guys some advice on anything, where to go, I'd say reach out to some research people and invite them out to your places, and then try to get a tour of their facilities and start some conversations. That's what we kind of had done. And be persistent if you're trying to, build something. And okay, so that's kind of the end of that. Let's go back to the Q&A. Is there any of those questions that are particularly pressing, or let's open it up for more?
Just a question, Lana. Would it be, there's a lot of, I guess, probably smaller farmers than what you'd have over there. So less farmers probably got their own seed cleaning equipment. Is it common for farmers, or is it possible for farmers in your area to say, send this off to a more, I guess, open-minded seed cleaner as external to the farm, or is that not normal?
It is done some, but they tend to charge double or more what a farm can do on their own. And I'm going to go back to that. Some of these pictures. This green thing is a quick clean. That's a dockage cleaner. These are relatively inexpensive, basic little, they sometimes call them scalpers.
Yeah.
There's a rotary screen. This is, you can pick, I don't know if you guys can pick these up at auctions, but you may be able to rent one of those for a couple of days from somewhere, and set this up in the yard after harvest and do this in a relatively cost-effective way. So that's where people usually start. It's not super efficient time-wise. It's kind of annoying. So the people that scale this up are putting in some more suitable pieces of equipment. Like this one, I think, is an air system. So it separates things out by wind. An air aspirator, I think they call it, or something. An air separator.
Yeah,
So
that's the one I contacted you about, actually, that kind of style. Okay. I know a while ago, yeah.
So that's sort of the once people do decide that they're going to do intercropping in a decent sized way, that's usually what they're using. And that's a bit more of an investment than one of these quick clean things, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So anything else that's kind of pressing questions?
I guess on herbicides, is that something you're using in your plot trials, or are you sort of, how do you treat it on your place? And some.
With the pea and oats, we would just do a burn off. Sometimes we're doing the burn off after we've seeded, so we get the window just before the crops come up. With some of them, particularly the oil seed pulses ones, there's usually some pre-emergence products that we can use. Plus, we'll spray for the grasses. So we'll put it on a cereal stubble and spray out the volunteer wheat and the wild oats. So that gives us some herbicides, but it's still limited. There's basically nothing for perennial weeds. So that you don't have as much control over the weed situation as you do with a monocrop.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and I think there's some situations where you're harvesting the weed seeds along with this intercrop, so you're collecting a lot of those weed seeds out of the field and then not taking them back to the field. So there may be an effect of depleting the seed bank for certain things. Yeah. And then you end up cleaning all those weed seeds out in the yard during the separation process.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions about intercrops? The next little, we're just going to spend a few minutes on a really interesting initiative that Lana and a team have put together around, I guess, farmer-led. It's
So you want me to talk about the adopt a plot thing?
Yeah,
I did?
adopt a plot, which is
Yeah.
the crowdfunding.
It was kind of a crowdfunding thing. I got frustrated because our funding got cut. I couldn't convince anyone to fund a trial that was really interesting and popular with farmers. It was a chickpea flax one, was the first one we did. So I told the farmers, I asked the farmers on Twitter if, would they adopt my plots? Like they're orphan children or something, because we have expenses. We have to pay for these, for their care and upkeep somehow. And so I figured about $200 a plot would do it. And based on the amount of money that we got in, that would determine how many plots we could do. And we got enough to run 2 locations of a chickpea flax trial in 2018. And I've never heard of anybody doing that. And it was just out of frustration that I said, please get, I wanted to figure out a way to do that. Logistically, it was hard because it was a whole lot of $200 checks coming from a whole bunch of different people that we had to follow up with. And I wasn't using like a crowdfunding app or something. We just set it in increments of $200. So if you want to adopt 3 plots, then you send us $600. And I was kind of teasing people that I would like send them a picture to put on their fridge or something of their plot, which of course I never did. It worked all right. And one of the things I kind of had to promise them too was that I would send them, I think it was at least once a month, I was sending them an update of what's going on with the trial. Because I wanted people to feel like they're kind of participating in it, that they've got literal ownership of this trial, and they want to know more than just a final report at the end. So I'd say, we're overdoing plant counts, and send a few pictures out of what the trial looked like. But what ended up happening, whether it was because we did the adopted plot or not, is the next year it actually got a proper good research trial funded. I think that running the adopt a plot kind of forced the issue with some of the funders, because it makes them look bad if I'm collecting money directly from the farmers instead of the farmers sending in their money to their commodity groups or whatever is the usual funding organizations. Because then they start saying, well, I'm paying for my own research, I don't want to pay for yours. So it's a little bit embarrassing. I think I partially burned some bridges by doing it. I don't know if it's completely advisable, but for a farmer group like yours, if you've got the ability to coordinate something like that, and you can say, okay, we've got a pool of some money from some interested farmers, and then you could maybe even find some matching money from some agribusiness or something, and then go talk to researchers and say, they will do things for money. That's the main point of research, is that they do things for money, foundationally. So if you're coming with just an idea, that's nice, but they will likely ignore you. If you're coming with an idea and money, then you will have their attention.
Yeah. That's now.
I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, I know we've got. So it's probably a good time to. I think that's a good overview. Maybe a good time to open up to any questions. So you can unmute yourself and ask any questions of Lana. So
you had 30,000 of sponsors from the early days of SFS. What's SFS?
Southern Farming Systems.
Yeah. So that was directly from growers to fund trials, I suspect. Is that right, Jeff?
That was from agribusiness.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was all agribusiness. And then there was membership on top of that.
Yeah.
And a fair proportion of that was one poppy company with 10K a year for 10 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So your $200 a plot, Lana, what did that actually cover?
So that covered it basically covered a lot of our labor expenses and, you know, some of our materials and sprays and like we've always got facility costs and things like that.
Yeah.
For a lot of research farms, they've got their equipment and some of their core staff already, those are already paid for. Their facilities are already paid for through the government or whatever. But most of the work is done by summer students. So they need some money for seed and supplies, and they need some money for summer students. So that is generally what that sort of money is going for, is it's the summer students out there doing measurements and trimming things.
And what time is it in Saskatchewan at the moment?
8.
At night.
AM or PM?
PM.
8 p.m.
Yeah, it seems to me that in this sort of, I guess, soil health, you know, and regen space in Tasmania, there's a lot of, you know, stuff that may or may not work, and plot trials are a pretty useful way to try and sort out some of the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah. Some of the trials I've done, I kind of treated like shotgun trials.
Yes.
Like, you know, it's kind of a spitballing effort. You don't have to fine-tune things if you can take your best shot at some crop combinations and just see what happens. It doesn't actually cost that much money if you're not worried about replication necessarily. If you just plant one plot of a whole bunch of different things and see what happens. That's visually really interesting. And if you can convince your research people that you're going to have herds of farmers coming to look at this because it's really cool, they like having people coming to research farms the most of the time. They get to write that down in their annual report that, oh, look how many people we had at our field day. I don't know if it works there the same way, but that's how it works here. You want live bodies out in the field to be able to write up in your annual report. So that's something that you can, and it does get people's attention. Like, there's a reason that I'm talking to you in Tasmania. This is a really cool kind of farming. So it kind of generates its own buzz.
Yeah.
Due to the sort of, yeah, due to the risk, like, you know, taking more of a risk for a farmer who's not used to doing this before, it's more likely, I think, to happen in more of a rain-fed kind of paddock. But it'd be really interesting to see side by side under irrigation and then rain-fed right next to, you know.
Yeah, you could. I think it is smart to just start with some small plots, because you can try so many different things with small plot research seeders, and then just try to learn what you can from them. And then you're not really risking a bunch of money and time and stress with this stuff. And then take it some steps after that. If you think find some winners, then scale them up a little. So there's a question about collaboration with researchers in Australia. There was a group that came out here to our research farm. We had Australians out here twice. John Kierkegaard was one, and so it was the CSIRO people.
Yep. John CSIRO. Yep.
Yeah. And then I forget the names of a lot of them. I could maybe send you a few Australian people that are working on some intercropping ideas, or want to work on intercropping ideas, and are the researchers need a herd of farmers behind them saying, we actually want to try this, but we need to know how. It's hard. It's kind of a chicken or egg, how do you get started problem for both researchers and farmers. farmers. So that's why pairing up is really important.
So Lana, I mean, just so that the rest of the discussion's vaguely aware of what's already going on, we've done 3 separate years of intercropping here and learnt a heap of things not to do and a heap of things that sort of work. So I'm happy to share all of that information, but in a nutshell, we did Sayer oat, pea and tillage radish one year, and we learnt pretty quickly that tillage radish and Sayer oat are really similar size seeds, which I wasn't expecting them to be quite so similar.
Not easy to separate.
And it was not easy to separate, and it wasn't, you would never do it again. It cost too much to separate, long story short.
I sometimes tell people to, when they have seed that they think they want to plant together, mix that seed together before you ever put it in the ground and figure out, can you actually separate it before you put it in the ground?
So I think, and so then we grew rye corn, which is cereal rye for North Americans, and tick beans. And that was an interesting crop, a really, really big variation across the paddock. We had a lot of slug damage in the cereal rye in a couple of hectares. But yeah, we got a really good crop. We got really healthy tick beans probably in a good year. Quite susceptible.
What are tick beans?
Tick beans are a small seeded fava bean. It's sort of a niche crop, and we're mainly growing them at our place for cover crop uses, because you don't need so many in your mix to make, you don't need so much volume.
We have a small seeded fava bean here.
Yeah.
That maybe it's
used for the horse industry.
It's just a little bigger than a yellow pea.
Sounds pretty similar. And then this year we've done Sayer oat and maple pea with the intention of trying to have some harvestable peas. And we've mainly windrowed all of those each time to try and help even things up at the end. And where we are on the coast, we get a lot of sort of sea breeze in summer too, so it helps us get in there and harvest them. Just drying things out where we are is a bit of a challenge. And that's going to be cleaned in the next few days. It's really interesting to see how it goes. Like walking through the Sayer oat crop this year, in some areas you can't see many peas at all, but then when you see it coming in the combine, you're sort of like, oh yeah, there's some there. And but yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sayer oat. I don't know what they call them in the US, but there is.
We're talking about black oats.
Yeah, black oat. Yeah, similar. So yeah. So I think they're from South. I think they're from Europe originally, and then they've made they're a big cover crop in South America, I think.
Cover crop seed is something that's a lot of people are starting to grow, because that can be quite good margins on them, but small quantities. Yeah.
So, and for our business, it sort of makes a little bit of sense. The extra work and stuff for our business is questionable whether that makes sense. We're sort of working on that at the moment. Yuri Wolfert, who's on the call too, he's been trialing some things this year, and I know some of the organic guys have tried things in the past too. I'm not sure if that's still happening, but at Elizabethtown there, I'm just forgetting their family name, but behind Elizabethtown there. So that's sort of what I know about. No doubt there's other people who've tried things, but we just don't know about them at this stage.
Yeah, Dave, it might be worthwhile seeing if someone like Robbie Toll will be interested in trying this out if he hasn't already, because he went down a Cressy way, because he's experimented before with under one big centre pivot, according to different soil texture and elevation, planting a heap of different crops under the one pivot, but they're all in their own little monoculture patches.
Yes. Yeah, it seems to me, from my experience talking to the guys in Victoria, like Vic No-Till and things, the way I'm sort of paraphrasing what I remember, but it is that it's a form of variable rate seeding. So what you see is that, you know, that little bony bit of the paddock, you know, one crop will do better than that, and in the dip, one of the grasses will do better in that, you know, and so it is a way of getting some variable. It's sort of low tech variable rate, and it really does make a difference, I think, in variable soil conditions.
And
it
that's
sounds
what
like a good idea.
can help. It sometimes can help with weed competition, because there's these, you know, whatever is best adapted in a particular area will end up being dominant, and then it's competing with the weeds instead of just, you know, maybe a pea crop that was going to struggle. Then you've got an oat crop that will compete in some areas that the peas struggle.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Lana. Is there any other questions? Please jump in.
Nothing, but I think that was really good. Thanks, Lana. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no problem.
We can do it again sometime if you guys. We can make it an annual thing if you want. You can tell me what you've been getting up to, and you can cover some more things.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, I think we're just sort of starting out on this journey, and you've given us some great things to think about, and I'll maybe try to get those crop combinations, and also there's some exciting things in that, and then also thinking about how we do these plot trials, and thanks for touching on all the realities of you know, especially the seed. I think for most people, I know for myself, it's the seed cleaning and separation. That's sort of the big hurdle. I found that they generally grow really well, and there's, you know, we've had some good success with on our place with reduced you know diseases associated with in the 3 years we've done it, and so I hope that's, you know, for everybody who tries it, but that's given me the confidence to go forward and try next year. We've also had some problems, especially this year. We had you know, wild radish is a good one, not getting on top of wild radish when it's young, because you're trying to hold on to an intercrop, and then struggling for the rest of the season. So there's lots that we can learn from each other about, and and hopefully we can, next year we can report back with some interesting results and some new ideas. But on behalf of Soil First Tasmania, thank you very much for giving us your time, Lana. It's absolutely fantastic. And if anyone is on Twitter, then you've got to follow Lana. She's got some good stuff that comes up, and well worth a look.